What's going on, No Nation? CJ Wilson here with DoakTalk, here to bring you guys another episode of Behind Enemy Lines. FSU has, the upcoming game this weekend against the Memphis Tigers. And with me, I have Frank Bonner II, football reporter for the Daily Memphian. Frank, how's it going?
Doing all right. Appreciate you having me on.
And I most definitely appreciate you for, taking the time out to do this, to do my research on Memphis football, and your name popped up as one of the more well-renowned reporters within the area. So definitely wanted to reach out to you and get your opinion on the 2024 version of the Memphis Tigers heading into this game against the FSU Seminoles.
Yeah. It starts with who they got leading that offense and Seth Henigan, and it just kind of goes from there.
Most definitely. Yeah, so we'll get started and get to the interview. But it's crazy. I got some Memphis ties, man. I root for the Memphis Tigers a lot. They're one of the second teams that I root for. Reason being, my dad played ball for the Memphis Tigers in the late '80s and played receiver, played a kick return. I think at one point in time had a kick return record for the Memphis Tigers. Ended up getting drafted fifth round by the Green Bay Packers. So yeah, man, I've been following Memphis football a lot, and I root for the Tigers. He's actually going to be coming to the game and has my 4 or 5 friends that'll be at the game as well, former teammates rather. So it's going to be an interesting outing in Tallahassee for sure.
Yeah, and it's crazy. It's a small world for the ties to kind of circle back in that way. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be a big day for your dad.
Yeah, most definitely. Let's talk about Ryan Satterfield and the job he's done as head coach for the Memphis Tigers. Mike Norvell is the former head coach at Memphis, and Satterfield was chosen to replace Mike Norvell and has done a stellar job so far with the Memphis Tigers. They're going to be one of the better teams within the G5 ranks. A lot of people are talking about, conference champion possible and a possible playoff berth as well. So let's talk about the job that Satterfield has done at Memphis thus far within his tenure.
Yeah, I mean, I think in his first year back in 2020, he had a really good year. Set the record for the best winning percentage at Memphis in his first season, first year head coach. This year 2 and year 3 struggled, had some bumpy, went 6-6 and 7-6, and then last year they really put it together. Right, had a 10-3 record, a big win over Iowa State in the Liberty Bowl. And then you can kind of see that momentum from last year heading into this year, right? He has a 4-year starter at Seth Henigan, who I already mentioned. Um, Rock Taylor was in that same draft class. Greg Rubin on the defensive side in that same draft class. He's recruited a bunch of different transfers, and so his ability to recruit talent, and then in this day and age, you got to continue recruiting the guys that are in that locker room, especially when you have Power 5 schools, trying to poach them every year. I think Ryan has done a good job of keeping his talent together in order to create a season that has this amount of expectations going into it.
You spoke about, like I said, Seth Henigan, the guy that kind of runs the show, 4-year starter for the Memphis Tigers, dynamic quarterback. Talk about what he brings to the table.
Yeah, right. I mean, for starters, his football IQ, right? If you talk to offensive coordinator Tim Cramsey, right, he'd tell you that he is one of the he's one of the smartest players that he's ever coached. He said, right. So it starts from there. Seth is a guy that doesn't get, and this will be important in a game like this, right? He doesn't get too high when he has success, and he doesn't get too low when he makes mistakes, right? And so, and this is a game, especially going down to Tallahassee, he's gonna need to be even keeled and right that ship, because no matter what the outcome is, right, there are going to be some tough moments in this game for Memphis in terms of having to pull some stuff out on some drives, whatever. And Seth Henigan is a guy that can do that, right? I mean, he was given the keys to run the offense from day one as a freshman, and he's had the keys ever since, and he's been driving them, since he stepped foot on campus. And so the locker room looks to him and believes in where he can take them. And this team will go as far as he can take them. Obviously, the defense has to do their part and everything, but it starts with Seth Henigan.
It's funny you mentioned, Satterfield's progression as far as 6-6, 7-6. I forget the exact records, and then pretty
Mhm.
good last year. Expect to win the conference, be in contention for the conference this year. And you start a freshman quarterback, and you go through that progression. You see the results, in the later tenure of his career. So that's interesting. You kind of painted that picture for us. Let's move on to the running back room. And Mario Edwards is the guy, the lead back for the Memphis Tigers, the transfer from South Carolina. Talk about that running back room and what they bring to the table.
Yeah, well, for starters, right, there's depth in that running back room, and Sutton Smith is a guy who he started in game one against North Alabama, right? And he was a guy who was expected to be able to do a lot of different things for Memphis. His skill set allowed them to line him up at receiver. He was a starting kick returner. Well, he gets hurt, and he's out for the season. But you also have a guy like Mario Anderson, transfer from South Carolina. The run game struggled against North Alabama, but that's also the game that Sutton Smith went out. There were some adjustments that had to take place. You look at what happened against Troy. They had a whole week to game plan knowing that they weren't going to have Sutton Smith. Mario Anderson runs for 125 yards on 17 carries and 2 touchdowns. And then a guy like Greg DeRosier, he has a similar skill set as a Sutton Smith, right? And so he's in that number 2 spot. Memphis is hoping that he's a guy that they can use in the passing game and in kick return. And, the same way that they were trying to use Sutton Smith, Greg DeRosier may be a guy to kind of fill those shoes, right? And you've got a guy like Brandon Thomas, who's had an up and down career with injuries and everything. But one thing to stay consistent with Brandon Thomas looking at last year is they've started to use him as that goal line short yardage running back, right? So if you look at his carries, right, he had what was it, 3 carries and 2 touchdowns or something like that. He's one of those guys where he's not gonna necessarily get the ball on 2nd and 6 or 1st and 10, but when it's a 3rd and 1 or a 3rd and goal, Brandon Thomas is gonna go out there and get that 1 or 2 yards.
Yeah, my apologies. I think I said Mario Edwards. I'm not sure where I get that from. Mario Anderson is the running back. My apologies. Before we continue, make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Again, like this video and subscribe to the channel to get all the news in regards to FSU, the opponents they're going to be playing for the upcoming week, and things of that nature. All right, let's move over to the receiver room. You have Rock Taylor, the big body receiver, around 6'3", 20 to 15 pounds, had over 1,000 yards last year. What about the receiver room and Rock Taylor and what they bring to the table?
Yeah, Rock Taylor is a guy that waited his turn, right? We talked about Silverfield being able to keep his talent in the locker room. He was a guy that in that same class with Seth Henigan, right? Rock didn't see much of the field as his first year, got a little bit um, more playing time his second year. Well, if you look at last year was his breakout season. Last year he showed that he can be a guy to lead a receiver room, and so he's going into this year with a lot more confidence. He's a guy that Seth trusts, who he can count on, and then the way that him and Demir, right? Demir is a guy that can take the top off of defense in terms of his speed, right? So having those two tandems go hand in hand makes this receiving core dangerous. And then you have a guy like Kobe Drake. I mean, Kobe Drake is a guy that I talked about Brandon Thomas in those 3rd down situations where Kobe Drake's a guy that, on 3rd and 5, you need somebody to catch the ball in the middle of the field, and knowing that they're going to get hit, Kobe Drake's going to hold on to that ball. So he's a guy that, Seth Henigan can trust in those situations. And then if you look at the Memphis offense over the years, even when Norvell was at Memphis, they used their tight ends in the passing game. That's one thing that has stayed consistent with Memphis. And so you can't forget to mention guys like tight ends Anthony Lanfear and Brendan Doyle, who Brendan Doyle, every time he touches the ball, it's usually a touchdown, right? Like those 2 guys are dangerous in the red zone. And so you always have to look at those 2 guys when you get closer to that touchdown. And Seth, he has a history of using his tight end since he's been here.
All right, good stuff. So Satterfield is a offensive line coach by nature, right? So let's speak about the offensive line in the tight end room and what FSU have to face within that unit.
Yeah, so the offensive line is is fairly new, right? You have Xavier Hill and you have Jonah Gamble, who are the two returners from last year. But both of those guys are playing um, new positions than they did last year. So you have, and then the other three guys are all transferred. So you have a group of five guys who have never played together as a unit playing new positions. And you saw some of the growing pains in week one against North Alabama. That's another reason why I think the run game was a little bit slow. But if you look at game two against Troy, it looked like they got it together. So that obviously takes time. This is the first time in Seth Henigan's career where he's having somebody snap him the ball who isn't named Jacob Likes, right? Trent Holler's the new center there. Jacob Likes has been the center Seth's entire career, right? So there's some chemistry things that need to take place there, which I talked to Trent Holler a little bit ago, and he said the chemistry there has been great with Seth. They hang out all the time, and so obviously you need that. So this is a new offensive line, and with that, comes some challenges. Now it's interesting to see how they do against a D line like Florida State. Now, obviously, the last two games, Florida State's D line hasn't been what everybody expected it to be, but the
Mhm.
talent is still there, right? And so I think some Memphis fans are looking at what happened to Florida State in those first two games and still not realizing the talent that is on that side of the ball for them. That offensive line is still going to have to show up. So this would be an interesting test to see how that group meshes in a battle like this.
All right, let's move on to the defensive line. What are some of the guys that FSU should be looking out for, and what do they bring to the table?
Well, obviously, Memphis has went and got some transfers on both sides of the ball, right? So you got um, Javon Dennis, who's new to the team, Patrick Lucas, who's new to the team from Indiana, and then I think William Whitlow had a really good game in the season opener, right? He had a forced fumble, and then he had a pressure that essentially forced the interception that Devion Ross caught. And so I think that defensive line, this is another game, right, where we'll see how they do. But I've liked what I've seen so far out of that group, especially with same with the offensive line in terms of having so many new guys. I think they're meshing well, and then defensive coordinator Jordan Hankins, he rotates guys in and out of that defensive line, so you'll see multiple guys on the field on rushing pass or so be it when you play against them on Saturday, when FSU plays against them on Saturday.
Let's move on to the linebacker room, and a couple of guys that stand out. You have Chandler Martin and Elijah Herring. To speak about the linebacker room and what these guys bring to the table as well.
Yeah, the linebacker room, honestly, and this is, I mean, it's not surprising to see why Jordan Hankins was named, defensive coordinator. Right, he's been a linebacker coach for a few years before being the coordinator, and since I've been on the beat, the linebacker group has been the best unit of the defense year in and year out, and this year is no different. Right, with Chandler Martin, first team All Conference last year, Chandler Martin. I talked about Seth Henigan's IQ as a quarterback. Jordan Hankins talks about Chandler Martin in the same way in terms of his IQ on the field. Then you bring over a guy, Elijah Herring, who led University of Tennessee in tackles last year before transferring to Memphis. You put those two guys together, and that's a dangerous combination. And then a guy like Matt Hudson, who had the interception week one, and so like all of the talent that's in that locker room, right? I was impressed with the snaps that Bryce Edmondson had, in those first couple of games, and so that linebacker room is probably or not probably, it is the staple of that defense in terms of where the most talent is.
All right, moving on to the defensive back room. You got a couple of guys in Greg Room and AJ Watts that kind of stand out to me. Let's talk about defensive backs as a whole, and again, what they bring to the table, what challenges they could give the FSU receivers.
Yeah, well, since you mentioned Greg Rubin, I'll start there. He's another guy, right? That freshman class that came in with Seth Henigan, right? His freshman year, he was a starter as a true freshman. So Greg has played a lot of football. That coaching staff trusts him a lot, right? To move around. He was a cornerback when he first came, played safety. Now he's in that, what Memphis calls that hybrid Tiger role, because they trust him to do a lot of things. Another guy that heading into the season, I think, who was forgotten was Davion Ross. Davion Ross is a guy who last year he had a season-ending injury in game 2, but his first year in the league, his first year with the team 2 years ago, he was a stud. He's back healthy. You see, he got the interception against North Alabama. He's a guy who I think, as a corner, can be really beneficial for this defense. And then, obviously, Memphis brought in some transfers, guys like Kobe Minor, who can really play, right? Greer is another guy. AJ Watts, who you mentioned, is another guy. And so they have the pieces, but this is just another test to see how they operate when you're going up against different styles of offenses and different passing attacks. And so, but they have the pieces to mesh to make this defense improve from last year, because they really struggled in the passing defense last year. That's one of the marks where, heading into this year, if Memphis wanted to have the season that it's expected to have this year, the passing defense had to be better. So there's a little bit of a microscope on those DBs to see how they do when they go against intense pressure.
All right, that's good stuff. All right, let's talk a little bit, Frank. So, give me your keys to victory for the Memphis Tigers. Some things you feel like they should do or can do in order to have some success against FSU. Some things you think they should key in on to have some success, and also some things you feel like they can't do at all in order to lose the game and let it get away from them. So, what are some of your keys to victory in order to win the game, and also some things that can't go in their favor or the opposite direction for FSU for Memphis? So, what are some pros and cons, so to speak, with regards to the attack for the Memphis Tigers?
Yeah, honestly, I think it starts in the trenches, right? If you look at the two games that Florida State lost against Georgia Tech and Boston College, it really started in the trenches, right? You can't that offensive line can't let that defensive line push them around. That's kind of what impacted the game the most in those two losses. And so, if you're Memphis, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just got to do what those other two teams did, which is win your battles in the trenches. And if you do that, I think for the offense, other things will take care of itself, right? Because if you get the run game going, I think the strength of this team is its passing game, right? But in order for them to win the game, Memphis has to get their ground game going. It doesn't need to be, um, Mario Anderson doesn't need to run for another 125 yards, but it needs to be consistent enough to where the run game helps open up the pass game. And once that happens and the offense is in a rhythm, I think that'd be good for Memphis. And then the things that they can't do, um, is turn the ball over, right? You're coming in to Tallahassee, Florida. You're still an underdog. You don't want to give a team extra possessions and extra ammunition to beat you by turning the ball over, because it's already going to be a dogfight for Memphis to win this one, and so they can't have any of those errors. So if they protect the ball, control the trenches, which is easier said than done, they'll have a shot.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in regards to just don't reinvent the wheel and do what's being done as far as against FSU to have some success. And you look at the time of possession in those two games. Georgia Tech and Boston College possessed the ball the majority of the game, and want do the running the ball and eating at the clock and preserving those drives. So I do agree if Memphis can do those things, they could possibly have some success. All right, give me your score prediction for this game. How do you feel like this game will end up going either way?
Man, I've been going. This is a tough one to do, right? Obviously, this is probably the toughest one of the season. I know a
Hmm.
lot of people are down on FSU, but if you look at what's at stake for FSU, right? I mean, they lost their first two games. It's just desperation time for them. They have no other choice, right? I mean, they don't want to. They were a preseason number 10. They don't want to go 0-3, and so I do think that Memphis is going to get a better version of FSU than Boston College or Georgia Tech did. And so because of that, I think I'm going to give Florida State a 10-point win.
You're a lot better than me, Frank. Hell, I've been on the opposite side of it. I've been real high. I do think they win this game, but I think it'll be a little bit closer. Give me Florida State 27-21. Memphis comes into Tallahassee and makes it a good one. Good one. But again, appreciate you, Frank, for hanging out with me. Let the people know where they can find you at.
Oh, yeah. If you want to read me, you can check out my work at dailymemphian.com. It's always appreciated. If you want to find me on Twitter, anywhere on social media, is Frank_Bonner and then the number 2.
All right, perfect. You guys heard it, man. Go check out all the content that Frank has to offer, especially to this FSU game. Again, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and go Noles.